The story of the United States seeking to control Greenland has long ceased to be a vague idea or a media stunt designed to grab headlines. What was once dismissed as idle talk is now being discussed in earnest among major powers. Washington has explored every possible avenue to gain control over this vast island. From proposing an outright purchase to considering tougher options if necessary. At the same time, NATO has felt compelled to remind everyone that even though the United States plays a leading role within the alliance, it is still bound to respect the sovereignty of its allies. Denmark, the country that administers Greenland, has recently issued statements underscoring its determination to defend its territory at all costs. Despite the fact that the potential challenger is none other than a close ally that has stood shoulder to shoulder with it for decades. Denmark's decision to allow its military to respond proactively to threats shows that Copenhagen fully understands the seriousness of the situation. Greenland is no longer just a distant, frozen land. It is rapidly becoming a geopolitical flashpoint where security, economic interests, and global strategy intersect. To understand why the United States is so determined, one must look back at how Washington has viewed the world for more than a century. Since the Monroe Doctrine, the United States has made it clear that it would not accept deep interference by external powers in the Americas. Initially, the perceived threat came from European empires. Today, that concern has not disappeared. It has simply expanded as China has risen as a comprehensive strategic rival. Through this lens, Greenland carries special significance because it lies on the North American continent. In the thinking of U.S. policymakers, this territory is destined sooner or later to fall within Washington's sphere of control. Or at the very least, must not end up in the hands of any other great power capable of threatening American security. America's greatest fear is not Europe, but the possibility of China expanding its influence into the Arctic. If one day China were to secure a strategic foothold in Greenland, even in the form of logistics hubs or Duluth projects, it would, from the U.S. perspective, amount to a direct threat. This scenario evokes memories of the Cold War, when the United States was plunged into a severe crisis after Soviet missiles appeared right on its doorstep in Cuba. That is precisely why Greenland is seen as a security shield the United States cannot afford to ignore. But the story does not end with the calculations of great powers. The people of Greenland themselves are also facing a far from simple choice. Imagine a community living in a harsh, icy land with a limited economy, suddenly presented with the prospect of becoming U.S. citizens. For many people around the world, American citizenship is a dream worth an entire fortune, even a lifetime of sacrifice. Yet for Greenlanders, that prospect could arrive without them having to pay anything at all. This alone has made some on the island curious and even seriously contemplative. Surveys have shown that a small percentage of Greenland's population supports closer ties with the United States, with some even considering the possibility of becoming a U.S. state. However, the majority remain cautious or opposed. This division stems from Greenland's very unique reality. It is not an independent nation in the traditional sense. Throughout modern history, the island has been under Danish control and has only been granted a degree of self-rule in recent decades. Because it lacks a long history as an independent state, the notion of national identity in Greenland carries a very different character compared to countries with we've millennia of history. For many peoples, being absorbed into another country is almost unthinkable. For Greenland, however, the question tends to be more pragmatic. They weigh which option would offer a better, more stable life for the people on the island. History shows that Denmark once considered selling Greenland, but ultimately chose instead to formalize its sovereignty in order to retain the territory. That decision was strategic, allowing Denmark to preserve legal control under international law. From a purely economic standpoint, however, Greenland has never been a goldmine for Copenhagen. On the contrary, it has been a significant financial burden. On paper, Greenlanders are classified as having high average incomes because they are included in Denmark's national statistics. In reality, daily life is far from easy. The local economy depends almost entirely on fishing and seafood exports. When prices fluctuate, the entire island can be shaken. Moreover, the harsh climate and tiny population make industrial development or economic diversification nearly impossible. Greenland's most important lifeline comes from the annual subsidies provided by the Danish government. These funds make up a large share of the island's budget, sustaining its welfare system and basic public services. As a result, residents enjoy Nordic standard social benefits, from healthcare to education. But this also means Greenland is heavily dependent on Denmark. If one day this financial flow were reduced, a crisis would follow almost immediately. In this context, the United States sees an opportunity, while Denmark finds itself facing a painful dilemma. On one side, sovereignty and national honor. On the other, a prolonged financial burden. And in between stands Greenland, a frozen island with a sparse population, yet holding a strategic position that compels the entire world to pay attention. If one looks squarely at reality, it becomes clear that Denmark derives little tangible benefit from Greenland. The island is vast, its population extremely sparse, while the cost of maintaining it remains consistently high. Denmark is not a superpower. Its financial and military resources are limited. Having to regularly pour money into sustaining a remote, harsh territory that offers almost no clear economic return has made Greenland more of a long-term burden than a profitable asset. By contrast, the United States views Greenland through an entirely different lens. For Washington, Greenland is not merely a land of ice and snow. It resembles a natural defensive wall guarding the northern approaches, playing a critically important role in the national security architecture. With its enormous defense budget, spending a few additional $1 billion a year to maintain stability on an island like Greenland is hardly an insurmountable challenge. In return, the United States would gain control over a key strategic position, blocking rivals' access while expanding its influence in the Arctic, a region growing ever more important as ice melts and new shipping routes gradually emerge. Beyond its military value, Greenland is also believed to possess significant mineral resources. Given technological constraints and high costs, Denmark has little capacity to exploit these resources efficiently. For the United States, however, the equation looks very different. Advanced extraction technologies, abundant capital, and a vast corporate ecosystem allow it to turn what once seemed unfeasible into real profits. A large territory with rich potential and a small population also means that social welfare costs would not be excessive relative to the long-term gains. This is precisely the calculation that has kept Washington persistently interested in Greenland for many years. However, what gives the people of Greenland pause has little to do with minerals or global strategy. What concerns them most is everyday life. At present, they enjoy a Nordic-style welfare system, where basic healthcare and education are largely not sources of anxiety. This creates a sense of security, even if living standards are not particularly affluent. By contrast, the image of the United States in the eyes of many Greenlanders is closely associated with expensive healthcare, high tuition fees, and uncertainty for those without insurance or sufficiently high incomes. For this reason, while the idea of becoming U.S. citizens may sound appealing at first, many grow hesitant when weighing it against practical realities. They worry that if Greenland were to be absorbed into the United States, existing welfare policies would no longer remain intact. A single surgery, a university degree, or even basic services could become a heavy financial burden. For a community long accustomed to strong state support, this is a very real concern, not a far-fetched fear. From the American side, if Washington truly wants to persuade the people of Greenland, it would have to offer commitments strong enough to reassure them. Yet this immediately becomes a sensitive problem. If the United States were to apply a special welfare regime to Greenland, questions of fairness among American citizens would arise at once. This would not only spark domestic controversy, but could also set an awkward precedent within an already highly complex political system. Therefore, Despite its strong interest in Greenland, Washington cannot act in a simple or straightforward manner. While the United States and Denmark continue to tug at each other, another factor quietly looms over every calculation: China. Beijing does not need to control all of Greenland to achieve its objectives. Simply gaining access to certain strategic sectors, investing in infrastructure, or building long-term economic influence would be enough to unsettle the United States. In an era of intensifying global competition, even a small opening in the Arctic could be sufficient to shift the strategic balance. This is precisely what places Greenland in such an awkward position. With a population of only a few tens of thousands, the island nonetheless bears the weight of global power politics. Every option comes with risks. Remaining tied to Denmark offers familiar stability but prolonged dependence. Leaning toward the United States may open new paths for development, yet it also carries uncertainties surrounding welfare and identity. Allowing other major powers to gain a foothold risks turning Greenland into a chessboard for struggles far beyond its own capacity to control. In the worst-case scenario, should tensions escalate, Greenland could become a flashpoint where the interests of the United States, Denmark, NATO, Russia, and China overlap. An island blanketed in ice and snow, sparsely populated, yet swept into a harsh geopolitical vortex. This is what might be called a geographical curse, where a strategic location attracts attention far beyond the ability of those who live there to shape their own fate. In the end, Greenland's future remains a large question mark. Whatever path it takes, it is clear that the island will continue to play an important role in the global contest for power. And in today's world, it is often the places that seem the coldest and most remote that become the decisive hotspots shaping the fate of the entire planet.